And I decided that as my young family was growing, I needed to find an occupation which would support my family. So that was when I chose to be an attorney. Now, many people who don't know very much about me, they might think that that I was remembered and I was maybe somewhat successful because of the situation that I was born in or something of that nature. But let me assure you that it wasn't, because I was not born into extremely fortunate circumstances. We were not a poor family, but we were by no means a rich, aristocratic family. I had to learn at a young age what it meant to work. I worked the fields right next to the slaves. Even when I was an owner of a young farm. Now, when it came time for me to study law, we heard at the fundraiser a few weeks ago, we were talking about experience. And how maybe Kim Laurie doesn't have a lot of experience. Well, let me tell you something about experience and education. Most lawyers that were from the time period that I am from, they would go to maybe in Williamsburg. They would attend the College of William and Mary. If they could afford it, they might travel up the coast and maybe attend college at that great conservative Bible college, Harvard. Possibly Yale. Good schools. And the families were very well-to-do. What they might do is they might send their young children, or not young children, but young adult children, over to Great Britain, where they could study and they could apprentice under lawyers over there and gain experience. I didn't have the resources. I had a young family, as I mentioned. I needed to obtain my license as quickly as possible. So what I did was I borrowed 2 law books. And I read those law books from cover to cover. I studied those law books every opportunity I could. I would go across the street to the courthouse, watch the proceedings, to learn how what I was reading was put into practice. 6 weeks. I felt I was ready. 6 weeks. A lot of experience? No. I traveled to Williamsburg. Now, let me tell you about intimidation. I was not dressed as handsomely and as fine as I am today. As a matter of fact, I was in leather breeches and buckskin. I was rather smelly, too, because I was born and raised and spent most of my life, actually, in Hanover County. And I love to hunt. Love to hunt. And I didn't have fine clothes. I lived in the backwoods of Hanover County. The backwoods of what was then almost wilderness in the colony of Virginia. So I was not one of these polished, refined gentlemen. When I arrived in Williamsburg, I actually made a little bit of a scene because people were wondering, who is this man? What is he doing here? Why is he coming into the Capitol building? Peyton Randolph, George White, others, very distinguished gentlemen in Virginia's House of Burgesses. Some of the most influential men in the most influential colony. I had to interview with them. I know about intimidation. I know about fighting that proverbial uphill battle. I did obtain my law license, and I began to practice law. I jumped back a few years. Let's go back to May of 1765, when I became a Burgess. Now I was sitting side by side with these gentlemen. Side by side, once again, with the most influential, the most well-known people, not only in Virginia, but throughout all of the colonies. 9 days on the job as a Burgess. 9 days. And the Stamp Act came before us. Now it's interesting, give me liberty or give me death. Those seem to be words that people associate with me. But let me tell you something. I believe my crowning achievement in life was arguing against the Stamp Act. I issued 7 resolutions. Well, I actually issued 5 resolutions. I held 2 back. The Stamp Act, for those of you who are not completely familiar, had to do with raising money in the colonies to help pay for the French and Indian War, which indeed was an expensive war to fight. So Parliament decided that they would issue a tax, or they would establish a tax against just the colonists, and it would be a stamp that would be purchased that would be affixed to all pieces of parchment, all pieces of paper, legal documents, playing cards, brochures, pamphlets, newspapers, newsletters. People spoke out against this tax. Well, many people spoke out against the tax. Many of the General Assemblies throughout the colonies wrote letters in protest and sent them off to Parliament. Oh, that's nice. They spoke against it. But they knew that they would ultimately pay the tax. Because what else could they do? 9 days on the job, amongst some of the most influential people, as I mentioned. I issued resolutions that we should not simply talk about not paying the tax. Let's remind Parliament that we as colonists have the same rights and privileges as all natural-born English citizens. There was no right for Parliament. There was no right for the Crown to levy taxes against just the colonists. Nobody was saying this. Nobody was saying that we should resist. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've heard much about the Tea Party this evening. Let me tell you something about the Tea Party. It was May 29th, 9 days as I mentioned, that the Stamp Act came to our agenda. I issued the resolutions and they narrowly passed. They narrowly passed. And once they passed, they began to be circulated throughout the colonies. They were printed in the newspapers in various forms. But they were printed in the newspapers, and they gave encouragement. It was a groundswell of enthusiasm and a groundswell of resistance that we were not going to pay these taxes. The next year, Parliament finally rescinded the Stamp Act. It was supposed to go into effect on November 1st of 1765. The courts closed down because no business could be done because the stamps were not issued. In other places, in other colonies, the stamp distributors were burned in effigy. The boxes of stamps were confiscated by the citizens and destroyed. Now, I'm not suggesting that type of resistance. And what does this have to do with the Tea Party? We're still in 1765, 66. Well, then the Townshend Acts came in. The Duty Act came in. Several other acts of Parliament came in, which in essence did the same thing. Maybe some different forms. Maybe it wasn't just on papers. Maybe it was on